Okay, moving into part 2 of our work session this evening. I'm Megan Smith, Deputy Director of Public Works. I don't have a formal slideshow presentation following on Sam, so I'm going to sit at the table and not stand at the podium. I do have an outline for myself. It's really just tailored right after the structure of your packet material this evening. It's just kind of me on target and to keep the conversation moving forward. Really, the purpose for this evening is in honor of our newest additions to the board, to provide a bit of background, kind of a generic water 101, if you will, related to our source water, and give an overview, summarize some of our recent planning efforts related to source water planning, and then also preview some near-term policy updates that we're looking to bring and to solicit some feedback there. So it's informational only. I will just be looking for some thumbs up of board understanding, and then we'll get towards the end of it, solicit a little feedback. So as you're aware, just kind of frame the big picture, we are, our source water is heavily reliant on North River Irrigation Company for all of our surface water to date. That is supplemented by some groundwater wells that we have in town that are located just, we can walk outside and I can point them to you. Just here on, what was that, Wilson? Yeah. Hence the Wilson wells. Thanks. Yeah, that's actually before creative naming. We have had a lot of challenges coming out in the last 7 to 8 years, mainly related to some cost volatility due to the structure that is in part of that 1983 agreement with our North River Irrigation Company partner. We have identified a long-term supply gap as well as part of the water source development planning effort, and a strong need for creating some affordability and reliability in the long term. So the board did kind of already establish some initial direction via resolution 48/2025, which clearly gave direction to move forward with diversification of our water portfolio and reducing reliance on any single source. So really with that in mind, the goal, and I do apologize for my stuffy nose. I have a box of things for myself here, but I'm washing my hands a lot, I promise. But really the goal with this framing with the water source development plan is to move our system from that heavily dependent one variable cost source to a more diversified and predictable water portfolio, mainly predictable in that pricing structure. So with that, we'll kind of walk through our pack material. So as I mentioned, the Wilson wells, we have 3 municipal wells decreed up to 400 acre-feet annually. Actual use is typically lower than that. We do use about 25 acre-feet a year that's set aside for irrigation. We irrigate here at Library Park with those wells. ISO North and South irrigates off those wells as well. And so that really leaves us 375 acre-feet a year for potable production, but due to process limitations, some regulatory requirements of a wastewater treatment facility, which seems a little odd. But we have some limitations on the production that we can get out of those Wilson wells currently. Just for context, really in recent years, I think last year we did just over 120 acre-feet. We maxed out about 225 acre-feet in the last 5 years or so. So we do have, it is very reliable, but it is limited and it's not terribly scalable. So it's not something that we can just ramp up production. As I mentioned before, North River Supply is our core supply for our potable system. We have the 1983 agreement is what that is based around predominantly. That includes 275 acre-feet of what we call our stock water, and that is part of the 53 shares that we turned over to North River in 1983. For that agreement, they agreed to provide us a yield of 5.5 acre-feet per share, which is excellent. That's equates for that's what we is roughly 5.5 acre-feet per share. That's where we get 5.5 times 53, 275 acre-feet a year. That's very cost effective for us, and is planned to be part of our renegotiation moving forward as well, maintaining that stock water. There are 2 other additional buckets of water in that contract, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same. There's what's titled additional water and then option water. We exercised the full option at the time in 1983. So those 2 buckets are treated the exact same. Their pricing structure is the same. And we utilize it the same way. Now, What has really created the issue is the pricing that's associated with that additional and the option water is tied to a market value of North Cooter's share as well as prevailing ag loan interest rates at the time. Those costs have increased significantly and therefore that remains highly unpredictable. The pricing of that water per acre foot in any given year remains pretty highly unpredictable. I did include some graphs in that packet that just sort of illustrate the trends of market pricing of the shares over the last 20 years, I think. And then also how that is translated into the cost that we pay per acre foot, or even if you'd like to think about it per 1,000 gallons, that's a little easier to tie it to why our rates look like they do currently. That structure really is financially unsustainable. It has become financially unsustainable to the town. Now, in roughly 2018, the town started reacquiring North Cooter shares, primarily through dedication by developers, also through some targeted purchases, increasing that portfolio of ownership. So we have 76 shares to date. And in 2025, water year 2025, we worked with North Cooter to utilize and actually draw the multiple use portion of those shares to treat at through Reservoir 3 in the water treatment facility. The amount of water that's available to us at any given year is based on their allocation. So what they allocate each April for the ag portion of their shares and the multiple use portion. So it is variable on an annual basis. But in 2025, that being able to utilize that, the multiple use allocation was 2.5 acre feet per share. So 185 acre feet we got to use of our owned water that reduced by over $500,000 what our invoice was to North Cooter last year. Now, as you can imagine, like I said, that is a variable annually. Things don't look good. We love all the rain that we've had recently. That's very, very helpful to our residents and to the mountains. But this year they have already increased so the allocation they set in early April was, I believe, 1/2 acre foot of ag, 1 acre foot of multiple use direct flow. And then they created a new allocation bucket this water year, 2026, for the first time, which is the what they're calling multiple use direct flow allocation. So they have North Cooter owns 40,000 units of the Colorado Big Thompson project. There are 10,000 shares of North Cooter. So what that means is technically each share of North Cooter comes with 4 units of CBT. So when they have historically made a multiple use allocation, it's been based on the CBT quota. And then they apply a shrink through their system to make sure that the water that's lost in evaporation and infiltration is absorbed through the whole system. And they have to ensure that what they allocate, they can be sending a farmer's head count. So this year they have defined an additional multiple use portion. So this is other water from direct flow decrees that they own that the decree identified as usable for domestic use. I think so they called it back in the day when these decrees went through. This wasn't necessarily municipal use, they would call it domestic use. Other municipal owners, North Cooter is about 75% owned by municipalities, municipally owned utilities or special district owned utilities, have kind of banded together and said, if you have this additional water, if you have decrees in your buckets of water that I can use to make potable water with, I want access to that. The anticipated yield of the river was so low this year, right? The snowpack was so low that their initial allocation for that new bucket was 0. They said, I don't think we're going to get anything. I don't think any of these rights are going to yield at all. They have, however, and they have increased that already to over I think it's like 0.1032 now per share. And they also increased the multiple use CBT allocation from 1 to 1.5. So already what we're going to yield for our 76 shares is not as much as what we got last year, but it's still offset by a couple $100,000 at least, being able to utilize that water. Now, all of that to say, continued ownership and increasing our ownership in North Peter is a good thing. It creates predictability and reliability, and it gives us some control over our costs as a whole with the company. Now, let's move into some recent planning. We completed a water source development plan in 2025 that was presented to the Board of Trustees, I think in September. It was predominantly completed in April or May of 2025. But there were some changes that took place to some of our assumptions over last summer. So heading in just with the initial analysis was to, that water source development plan was to identify our future demands, so identify our supply gap, what do we have today and what we're going to need in the future. Also looking, really identifying options for diversification through predominantly a lens of affordability. So not just throwing all spaghetti strands at the wall and seeing what sticks, but understanding which ones of those we can even remotely afford. And affordability and price are not the same thing. So though something might be cheaper, if we have to pay for it all today, we can't. But if we could spread it out over a decade, then we could, right? So that makes it affordable. I did link in your packet material this evening, or in the memo, to that board packet material, so you can access the full report that was in there and the presentation and things. If you'd like to dive into a little bit more detail, it does go into a lot of detail on the variety and the different options that we considered, gave reasons why some of them were shortlisted and some of them weren't, and then went into more detail on how we landed on the proposed recommendation from West Water, who's the consultant that performed that for us, of looking to diversify by increasing our ownership in North Peter, predominantly through dedication, not necessarily any more targeted purchases, but allowing it to be dedicated in order to meet future demand. And then looking to fill that supply gap through a diversified source. So if we could, not just another river direct flow that's going to be impacted by all the same droughts and so on. It also looked at, and that included analyzing other surface water sources like CBT and or non-tributary groundwater, which is becoming pretty predominant in the news. You've probably heard some about it. Terry Bison Ranch is a non-tributary groundwater project that was developed by the city of Greeley. And there are a couple of players out there that are working on adjacent lands in the same upper Laramie aquifer to develop that as a water source for regional participants. I'll link to that a little bit more. I did something that gets a little bit confusing though, and this is the ever-evolving nature of water resources planning and the fact that you've had a hard time. There's always a chicken or egg issue because we can't afford to go out and buy anything until we can get some renegotiations completed with one computer. But if you just keep waiting for that, we may be waiting for forever is the feeling. So we did decide to move forward with this water resources planning after our source development plan. And at the time, we had to make some assumptions based on negotiation efforts at that time. So the initial past negotiations with North Cooter, our understanding to get them to the table was that they wanted a reduction in the total volume available to us through that contract. So when we first walked in the door with them, we currently can utilize up to 2,000 acre feet through North Cooter. When we first walked in the door with them, we said, we'll move it down to 1,500. Let's start these conversations. We're willing to take a hit if you'll come to the table and start talking to us. So that's where some of this initial modeling started from, was that we were planning around the baseline supply of 1,875 acres, 1,500 available to us from North Cooter, 375 from the Wilson wells. As we moved through the course of last summer, negotiations moved forward, it became very evident that the town was going to need to be in a position to fully replace the contract water through North Cooter in order to complete a renegotiated agreement. North Cooter finally came to us and said, we are not looking to have a forever agreement with you. The only way that we will come to the table to renegotiate these terms is if it is a termed agreement, which means there's an end date to it. With that in mind, that kind of evolved our supply gap strategy from seeking to secure about 750 acre feet to hopefully being able to secure 1,200. That would completely replace any contract water that we utilized through North Cooler in the last decade or so. Just as a reference, the highest year that we've ever utilized from North Cooler was just under 1,100 acre feet. That was in 2020. Drought year, everybody was home. We've never come close to using that again. We've never got over 1,000. Anyway, so really that updated strategic target moved to 1,200 acre feet of total acquisition as a recommendation coming out of the water source development plan. That would position the town to fully replace that contract water. So the strategic direction again, diversify that supply, so add a new source, highlighting this non-tributary groundwater as the primary option. Increase the ownership of our North Cooter, so continue accepting those shares as dedication to meet future demands as it's coming in. Ultimately replacing contract water altogether. Now, with that plan, just to clarify, that doesn't mean we would be replacing North Cooter surface water supplies, as we intend to continue building our ownership with them. And we also have a water treatment facility adjacent to that property. So we'll be continuing to use water through Reservoir.
Quick question.
Yes.
The 275 is part of the legacy. Will that remain after the whole year?
It would, as currently.
As we always have that 275.
Yeah. Right, would remain as currently proposed. So now moving that kind of long-term system transformation to targeting an acquisition of 1,200 acre feet, it's to improve cost predictability, long-term resilience, of course, but it really depends in part on how the storm supply evolves over time as well, and our relationship with them, and our ability to continue to utilize their infrastructure. So in January, I think of this year, 26, I presented to the board the current status of negotiations with North Cooter at that time. We presented essentially 2 companion agreements to solicit approval from the board to continue moving forward in this direction. And it was a renegotiated supply agreement that had a 40-year term, had a starting cost per acre foot of $1,200. Just as a reminder, we paid up to $3,600 in 2022. And adjusted by CPI annually. And there are some initial near-term step-down payments to transition into that payment structure. The companion agreement is storage and carriage and storage operating agreement which we don't currently have with North Cooper, that would allow us to utilize their infrastructure to move water through their ditches and into Reservoir 3 and store it in Reservoir 3 for us to utilize as a treatment facility. That could be unnamed sources at this point. It could be CDT, could be other junior water rights. And yeah, it could be as we increase our own ownership, if we get to a point where we are utilizing, they have in their bylaws, and this is just in their bylaws as a ditch company, they don't set aside storage buckets for any individual shareholder. And so you have an obligation to be utilizing the water as it's coming into that bucket. Currently, we really do, because we don't have that much ownership. But if we were to increase our ownership to, double what we have now, and we're not pulling it out at the same rate that we're putting it in, we would need a storage agreement in order to store that water there. And those North Cooper water, they'll get it to us. We don't have to take carriage to get to it. But because they don't set aside layers of their buckets for any shareholder, we would need a storage agreement to do that as well. So this is, looking into long term to provide us additional opportunities to carry and store water through their system. And if we have a term agreement with them, the stance that we've taken and the direction we're seeking the board is that we're not going to do one without the other. So we're not going to enter into a termed agreement. We don't also get to enter into a storage and carriage agreement at the same time. There's just too many risks there. And really, this is where kind of transition into that policy direction. So all of this sort of leads to what are we doing right now? What are our near-term steps to start moving in this direction? A couple of recommendations that came out of the water source development plan were to update the methodology that we use for our cash in lieu calculation. So we require, we have a raw water requirement, and that requirement is to be met either by wet water dedication, so shares from North Cougar, or we can allow a developer to pay cash in lieu of that wet water. And there are times when it benefits the town to make that decision and opportunity for a developer. It can also benefit the developer, but it's really there for the town to be able to require the best option for us at that time. Currently, our cash in lieu is required to be set in by the board through ordinance or resolution, and is generally brought with a fee structure conversation and adoption. What we would like to consider is changing code that would allow staff to develop a cash in lieu calculation methodology that we could bring to the board and have you vet and agree with if you do. And then essentially adopt a process to codify a process that will allow the town administrator, probably the public works director, to perform that calculation and be able to update that cash in lieu rate more often so that we're not lagging the market. And this can work in both directions. So the market can change and has in the past, especially 17, 18, 19, where it increased so rapidly we would not have been able to keep up with it. And at this point, 24, 5, and 6, share prices have remained pretty flat. And our current methodology for how we calculate cash in lieu, we've embedded like an inflationary adjustment in that to help hedge against those rapid increases. But what that can also do is make our cash in lieu maybe a little higher than it should be when there are times of, stagnant pricing. So we're looking at proposing this opportunity so that we can administratively update that cash in lieu through a formal calculation policy that we present, calculation methodology that we present to the board. Knowing that we would update on a fixed interval. I have seen, I'm recommending a quarterly update. But we could, even if that quarterly update there is no update, right? If the pricing hasn't changed, there's no need to change it, that would be the update. I have seen communities that it's on just an as-needed basis and they just monitor. Those are usually folks that are tied to CBT and CBT transactions are far more easily tracked than North Cougar share transactions. But I know some communities will update it monthly or we'll have a series where they update it monthly for 4 months and then they don't update it for 3 months or whatever. I don't think it's changing that rapidly, but we could consider that. It could be as needed. It could be staff is recommending quarterly minimum. And then we would be looking for some of your feedback on how you would like that information. If you agree with that approach, how you would like that information reported back to the board, whether that's also quarterly or and then know with with the budget process showing the annual updates. So that's the first policy consideration. And really the key takeaway there is ensuring that developer contributions stay aligned with current pricing. The next update, which kind of builds on this new allocation that North Cougar has begun this year, 2026, is looking to increase the share dedication yield. So currently, we accept North Cougar Irrigation Company shares, and we accept them at a yield of 2 acre-feet per share. And that's a very conservative assumption because, as I mentioned, there's 4 units of CBT per share, and that's assuming that a 50% quota, right, to only get 2 acre feet. Per share, and that's where that came from, that 2 acre feet. And I'm proposing that we still keep that conservative assessment, but increase it by those 0.2 acre feet, which is the long-term, well. It's been really long time, it's not 18 years, but they did a yield analysis on the decrees that are part of this new multiple use direct flow. And that long-term 18-year analysis showed that the average yield was like 0.35 per share. It was about 3,500 acres total annually, so it'd be 0.35 per share. So being more conservative, and in that analysis, the lowest year ever was 1,900. I acknowledge this year we're not going to see 0.2. I don't think they've already held the right to modify that allocation into July even. I think they'll probably end up with maybe 0.15 this year. But this is not the year on which you would face a decision like that, because it is literally the biggest year on that. And I understand that we need to hedge our bets against years like that. However, how you do that is by having opportunities to lease or bring in additional water from other sources, not by under allocating or undervaluing the yield that would come typically from the sources. So that would be the other policy direction that I'd like to get some feedback and have some discussion on this. So mainly, just sort of to get to the meat of it is with the cash in lieu updates. I'm curious if the board supports modifying it to administrative update, knowing that with that ordinance that we would bring, I would bring a calculation methodology, and it's going to be pretty basic. It's going to be, my proposal would be being based on at least the last 6 months, maybe the last 12 months of known transaction amounts that we have, divided by the yield value that we provide, right? So 2.2. What that would do, just so you know, right now, if we were to implement that today, that would look like right now our cash in amount is $121,400 per acre foot. That would reduce that to, at today's rates, which are about 245 is what shares have been selling at. I did that calculation on one of these pages. That would bring that down to about $111. $100. Everybody go buy North Fisher.
I'm on it.
Yeah, 111,364. So it would bring down that raw water dedication by about, a little more than $10,000. While also increasing yield that we would get. So it's doubly impactful to waters. And if you do support that, do you support quarterly updates? And then how would you like to receive reporting on that? So let's start with, do you even support moving it from moving it to the ability to be administratively updated?
Not to look at it.
Okay.
I can't say it's on 100% sure it's supported and I'll see it. But yeah, it sounds like because convening a meeting once a month with the board of trustees, passing up the ordinance to change the I have another question.
Yes, actually, I probably should have stalled on the policy guide and asked for
Yeah, that's
source spot question.
The question I have is, our Wilson wells, those are juniors like that. And there have been just many cases where the state inspectors said, things like water. Because of that. So when we drive, are we anticipating anything going to happen this year? If all that water they're going to see is coming up.
So I have not heard anything. I went to the, so we're part of what's called the polluter plan, is the short name for it, but Cashley Polluter Water Users Augmentation Plan. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and I went to their annual meeting this year, and they did not indicate they're anticipating any calls like that. Through that plan, we're automatically augmented up to 400 acre feet. So I would have to dive into that. That's why I have my two screen. And I can find some.
And the second question, that's more second question.
Yep.
Is there any way to increase production close to us? So we're not getting that 3. It's a tricky process. I understand that the evaporation that's great. Osmosis and change in that, and create more yield out of it for us.
It could. But currently, our limitation is we have some pressure limitations in the distribution system. And then we have, the primary limitation is our, effluent limitations. Our primary effluent limitations at the wastewater treatment facility. So we have, our new, permit, whenever she gets around to writing to us. Will have much lower effluent limits for selenium that we have been, it's spring 21, that we would not be able to meet with a production rate of over, right now, we're testing it right now, because the way we were running it even in February, we were able to run for pretty much the whole month. We exceeded those new primary effluent limits. For selenium at those specified. So it would require probably, I'm guessing, a full RO to replace the nanofiltration, because you can't really treat it at the wastewater treatment facility.
That would really hurt.
Well, that's the catch. We can drink it. We can drink far higher levels of selenium. Then you just can't discharge it to the stream. So there's, I've considered paths or avenues if there is an avenue to petition anybody around that. I'm there to understand cost savings if you would have to be higher. And the ways that you could treat it, maybe if the reclamation facility could be willing to be discharged through a wetland before it hits the stream, so you have to move the discharge point so it's not directly to the stream. In conjunction with CSU, test wetland or something, and that is an option I have talked to Greg Kernhan at Dawson Limited a while back about an opportunity like that, but the return on investment though is not tremendous. It would be fairly expensive. But I can think how expensive that is.
But and the last question I had, early on, we were talking about offering water. Now it's already used. It's from 40 to 20 years you're talking about 1,200 feet, which you mentioned. There's a lot of water.
So
I know you still have any discussion, but I mean, obviously, I'm not sure that but are we considering provisions with no kind of, yes, we can take serious definitions. But is there a provision in this new one provided that we will extra one to increase that yield?
there is. With a cost.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. And we are, I mean, so the current expectation and plan is that we would be able to be the predominant amount of growth, especially near to middle term, for sure with the shared. There are still enough transacting out there. Now, 50 years from now, that's probably not but yes, there are capabilities. There have been discussions around securing easement, that the easement is large enough that we could have the additional pipe if we need to, from the same potential water source. So yes.
One more question. I'm gonna have maybe an executive session to get more into the detail from the new trustees about that water.
Sure. Sure, and I think there's nothing wrong with talking about the fact that the Vito Water Project is a water project that's being spearheaded by a company called Front Range H2O. This is a organization that was pulled together. Fort Collins Water District is the first off-taker for that project. They have already signed their purchase sale agreement and their operating agreement with Front Range H2O. As a matter of fact, Front Range is holding a groundbreaking ceremony next Thursday that I would be happy to have anybody go with me if you would like.
So we didn't invite and I can get it out to the board.
Yep. It's next Thursday at 10:30 in the morning. And it will be, it's like an hour, and it will be off the circumstance, probably more than any detailed stuff. It's a very neat area to go up and check out. It was up there in the car. Yes, for sure. Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with talking about that. We've been in conversations with the prospect of learning more and diving into that opportunity.
We have that set up as a tentative presentation of the project on July 21st.
Yeah, it's actually even a work session to bring in some folks from Front Range for the video project. Yeah, learning and talk more about it. So.
Yeah, let's put Ryan.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think our trustee can touch on a number of good points there. The only question I had is at this, if this is not appropriate for now, it's more appropriate for executive session, please let me know. But the question would be, is the storage and up to this point, is the storage and carriage agreement tied to a fixed term as well? I can't remember if it was.
It is, and I brought that up. I think that it was, it's mainly that way because people are learning that professional agreements tend to go bad some way or another. I learned that at both City of Fort Collins and Town of Wellington. So I understand why they want to do that. There, of course, will be all of the legal provisions that there can be that says, mutually agree, can extend, reaffirm, all that sort of thing, but it currently would be a term as well.
That'd be that same.
Same
Yeah. Just.
With the clarification though, to trustee Hannah's point, earlier, that 275 acre feet of that legacy water is defined as being professional.
Yeah.
So long as there's any form of the ditch company still in place. So we could change forms, but so long as there's some form that's still in place, that legacy water.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I would certainly. I would certainly be in support of moving the cost and new updates to being administrative or share updates administratively. I think the board's only currently doing that once, and so I think that would be much more rational for us to do from a market outlook perspective. I certainly do understand it can go both ways, but I think that would be most appropriate. Yeah, I would also support the upping that dedication yield to 2.2.
Yeah, I first want to kind of just say that I think because you are targeting this based off of that development plan, I think that's really key that we're kind of sticking to what the previous board, which some people are here, but that work that those are no longer relevant, the work that was already put into it, and have that development plan for a reason so that you guys know what to base these decisions off of. I think that's important that we have that continuity as we work, or at least me personally. And I think that if moving it to an administrative thing also just makes sense to be more reactive. My only question was is that I like the kind of recommended quarterly reports and stuff to the board so that we're in the know. And that kind of worst case scenario when things, I think it was 2020 where you said it was just going up and up and up. Like what, the exact number, but how often would that have taken for you to be able to respond that fast? Would that have been monthly or, because in my head, I'm just wondering, about that frequency, whether it's on demand or every 3 months. My gut wants me to say on demand, give you guys the ability to react, especially if we see a worst case scenario. Because that's exactly what you want, boots on the ground, making sure that we are, updating it, we're basically losing, that opportunity or losing on it as a town. But now if it's every week, not trying to make that a full-time job. But I'm wondering, would every month at that point, again, that worst case scenario, is that kind of what that time would have looked like, or?
I think generally, so I mean, just for example, I've like the annual numbers, it went up, 17 to 18 went up about 15 grand. 18 to 19 went up 25, 19 to 20 went up 7.
Oh, okay.
Grand.
Yep.
And then another 50 from 25,
Mhm.
but then it went down to 20.
Mhm.
So I don't think it would be monthly, and I think quarterly would have adequately captured a pace
Mhm.
to maintain it. And then the one thing I could, I could see maybe it's, minimum quarterly and on demand is needed beside, or something like that, right? I would definitely want to make sure that there's just protecting from my future self. That there's some cadence that's required, so that it's like they're out there looking at it. Basically.
Yeah, and that aligns, I mean, I think with what Monica was saying, is that, like you said, even if that quarterly, there was no change, you still get it. Right.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden, you're getting, the apples that, that are coming up saying like, oh, we need to react right now. I would rather have, not wait 2 weeks or however long to have an ordinance or the board. I would rather, you guys have the authority to do that. So that would be my thought on that kind of administrative tool. And then I think again, that second part of the index and dedication from 2 to 2.2, again, as long as we are saying that is, in line with our plan, and I mean, go into that more, but I think if that all aligns, that's my view, and that I would go with those recommendations. We're kind of sticking to what we said.
I can work with Mr. Cooley. And Patty to see if there's not a way we can propose an option in the language that we can bring back. I think we think about a way that's like, it's a minimum quarterly. And under these circumstances could be locked or something that was like that.
Sometimes these things are pretty down and I think, sharp interest rate, for example, in the sharp interest rate. Somebody just go next to mine, monthly issues and see the council through the week. I almost was wondering, this is something that could be just as needed. I mean, you get people going to something called the solid Baptist something that as a contestant. But we got 6 farmers, whatever's easy, if it's quarterly, if it's monthly, if it's dynamic, where you just do an evaluation every time somebody comes up, says, okay, I'm going to actually blue. You do a quick evaluation, you can find something.
Changed enough to.
That number doesn't work anymore.
I'm gonna pause you for a second, Kendra. You have any questions or? You guys are kind of touching on one side of $1 million. Okay. As of you. No questions. It's pretty dense information for me. So, yeah, I remember me from way back when where I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to just chew on this for a little bit. But I don't have any objections to different questions in regards to if you feel like me.
It's better than what we had. From 83 until 3 years ago, we were always operating in those. You know, there's a share price,
Right direction.
and we codify it, and then that's what we collecting cash and everything, nothing with cash and. And then a year later, the share prices have gone, you couldn't buy the shares of what we needed cash and for, just get full. This,
So far,
we got great money.
so far I have a lot of data on what people have said. My only, comment that I have, and just because it's happened recently, and we're gonna be basically, is the developer consistency. The, what's to say that I start this project and then, you know, my numbers are gonna be shot out of the water because of a change that happens every single quarter. With all external factors that are gonna drive something. So my question, as we're going through this, is do we approach this perhaps how we might do with impact fees of a lot? Or an option to opt into whatever the rates are at that moment, right, but for whatever, the money in lieu. But I think we do really need to consider that. We just made the decision that I kind of full regret that we didn't consider or get the info. Especially if you don't have any significant increases in things that could really change a project. And then also, I'm curious if we need to administratively be able to dictate that we will not accept shares and we will only accept input based on strategic needs. And if that should be also an administrative decision, because, you know, we right now will take water or money in lieu. But at a certain point, we're gonna want the money in lieu to invest in diversifying our sources. And that might be a higher priority than getting more through the shares. So that should not be something that we necessarily have to go and talk through. And do all of the things that should be on some strategic direction for them, and maybe that should be administrative as well.
So currently it is administrative.
Right.
As far as, you know, we require, essentially code reads, we require, wet water or cash in lieu. Depending on if we say, okay,
Based on our,
based on strategic objectives.
Don't they come up to the commission and say, here's cash and you take nothing,
If we decide currently that, yeah, that for that development, and then if you know. Often this is a conversation with Bob and Cody about, you know, I'll be frank, we do want to be development friendly, and especially if either of those things help the town and equal measure, right? Then we're willing to discuss what's best for the developer and best for development, right? So long as they would help the town. And you're also correct that I could foresee a time in the future where we may be back and it may be a cash in the element. To your point, there's only going to be so many shares forever. At some point, we're going to have to dedicate money to this, you know, to the next development. Or we just strategic use of that and say that we're now changing it. And there are many places that take cash in the element because you gotta be on it.
you gotta be right on.
You gotta be on it and know what you're doing and know that there's a plan and executing the plan.
Well, I can foresee the plan being, for example, leave a.
Sure, that's awesome.
We don't know how much it costs, we don't. We don't have any, once we have it, then you can evaluate it with share, which reduces. Much rather be or time about the water versus do you take cash and move it up offset the cost. Of building and developing.
And at that point, that cash flow calculation would change. So we would have, I would be back in front of you if that changed. Because you're right, that cash flow calculation would change, because it would have to be structured in a way that's like, okay, we're doing this. We need to put, okay, yeah. Yes.
You gotta hit that, so we're not on that balance.
I had already considered, and so far in my like preliminary drafting, there was going to be a provision that said if you've met these points in your development,
Great.
you would lock in the rate that at whatever point you met that point in your development, you would lock in the then current rate. And if that point in your development happens after that, And I have all, then it would be the new updated rate effective on that date. I've also been talking with Cody about how best we communicate that out. If we know, especially if we can do it in a staggered approach, that's like, okay, we're analyzing it every 3 months and then it's effective 30 days after that or something. So there is at least a window where they know what the number is going to be and it's not in effect until the state. And I realize it's a small window, but that's doing what we can. We do have to stay current. Right. And then also they have often have every bit, if not more, of the pulse on the market.
Right.
Than we do.
Yeah. It's just if, impact fees are variable with it, and this is also variable with it, so it's just like, if the economy is doing the thing, then all the costs will be like that, this will just be, I don't know.
Well,
So
hopefully,
it might,
yeah, but
yeah, and that's the kind of thing, you upgrade your phone, you don't wanna have to be a new customer or you're gonna get rates, right?
Yeah,
You wanna be
yeah.
a returning or ongoing development, still get the bike rates. So. Yeah, so I mean, that's just something that was in the top of my head right now, since we're dealing with that for impact fees. But otherwise, I heard some pretty clear consensus, yes, yeah, on regular. Administrative adjustments based on a agreed upon calculation.
Yeah.
And we went to. I suppose.
Perhaps a bit off topic, but as far as grandfathering in any particular development for especially these types of yields. And when you have a project that's gonna extend over 20 years,
Right.
that could get very dangerous. So
I know.
I just
I mean, they have to be a
Very,
window at
very-
some point
that
regardless.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, if you were gonna do like a 1 to 2 year thing, that'd be one thing, but I don't know how long each of these phases is projected to take.
that's my, yeah, we would, well, I'll put some additional thought into that.
Okay.
If we start.
Okay.
No, because you're right, it can't be. It's gonna take a decade.
right.
Right,
It's not for a
You
whole
certainly
project.
don't wanna,
Yeah,
Right.
for the whole thing, yeah.
Keep in mind, you also have government and the union, so it changes conditions.
Yeah.
We need to increase the price.
Carl, plug yours.
Sorry about that.
There was one other thing I was gonna mention, which is that if we were gonna consider doing something like that, I would almost prefer that we keep the yield credit at 2 instead of 2.2, because that way that I feel like we're kind of hedged against potential future share price changes, but not a lot, but a little bit.
There could also be. Consideration that if you're. Okay, yes, you got this certain point in your. Development. Pipeline process. We can we can get you the rate that is today, not the rate that's going into effect tomorrow, that it requires you to pay the full within. 24 months.
Sure.
Like some, it's timestamps, so that like. Or 6 months, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't, it's not something that you don't just get to pay this at, at each building permit draw. Yeah, for however many years it takes you to sell the lot and you have the building, right, like it's.
Well, that cash in lieu based on
Today's,
conditions of
today,
today.
exactly, so you need the money
If
to.
you delay that over 24 months, guess what? You're paying 2 years and later.
Which is what we're doing right now, but we're just guessing what the inflation would be, and I think this based on 3 years.
It was this 2 years
Of
and
massive.
of big
Increase.
spikes, right, which is how we ended up with. Maybe a little bit over this way.
Can we consider the yield also as a calculated value? Subject to changes. For this meeting?
I hesitate to do that because. One, it opens things up for debate. There's something defendable about having it in code and sort of fixed in code. And do I believe that those yields can and will change? Yes, they change every year, right? Will we have another year like this year? Absolutely. Will it be next year or in 15 years? I don't know that. Neither does anybody. you know, this was really an effort in kind of transparency and acknowledging that there is, as we take new shares, those shares will come to us. Knowing that there's an additional allocation now for those shares, and so it was trying to acknowledge that there's a little bit more wet water that's coming in, that it's available for production. In a defendable way, based on, continued analysis of the share units.
Another
I
question.
can, I'm sorry, I was gonna say, maybe point two was the low end of that, but
The shares that you own,
76, yeah.
76. We can only use CD. Can we do anything with the attic? Can we release it? Can we sell it? Can we swap it for other?
We do, well, I mean, we use some of it for our own irrigation and stuff, for these, growing ponds and stuff. And we put the rest of it in their rental program, so we get money for it, but it's, there's some.
So,
Pretty much, yeah, so we get some of our assessment back,
but
a few $1,000s,
I mean, North Cougar does swaps, so we can see the portion.
we get more of it.
Here, because CBD can't come through Wellington without having machine.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
well, they can't get any seeds, so it's just about exchange.
that's right, that's right. So if we have shares, now if we were a farm, I yeah, we could use every drop of water from that shooting line. But if we don't do 18% of that water, we've got great ag portion. You can't. I'm just wondering if there's a way you could work out exchanges with others, as farmers or whatever, but it'd be something.
You can, but we would have to have the approval of the ditch company. We would need to have, I mean, essentially we'd be trading, this is what I envision. 2 for 1, I'll give you 2 acre feet of my ag, and give me like for your CBT, that's generally how swap like that works. Yeah, and we got, no, paying cash company for, or something to that effect. I have thought about it, right now, I mean, this year, our yield stopped at nothing, so that was the, our additions that ain't happening, but. I think it's something to think about when we do secure this fair storage agreement that provides us a way and mechanism to get other and more water in. There are ways to create some, I don't want to call them alternative transfer method, it's sort of to that effect. Where we have just, we have some agreements with farmers that will say, if we do all kinds of arrangements, and if the total share allocation is less than X, then you won't produce this year and I'll pay you not to produce, I'll take the water. Or exchanging, 2 for 1. Part of the issue though is North Cougar, and I do understand why. It's really beneficial for North Cougar to, as much as they can, control the rental pool, because their experience is when I was at City of Collins. I don't know what all these farmers are that we would rent to. And you could end up renting to somebody that in the end, they're putting the water down the ditch, because they were the last person off the Cowan, ditch, and we rented the water and they couldn't basically give it to them. So there's a lot of benefit for them managing that rental pool. And we do think, I mean, it's a few $1,000, but it's not going to waste, it's being utilized by local ag.
2,000 per.
No, just a few thousand, I think maybe we got like 11,000 1 year. Year assessments back,
Good comment. I would prefer quarterly or like a regular, reconsideration, that way it doesn't look like we are doing it, and like right before somebody pulls permit, so like some kind of unfair advantage. If we're gonna be able to go with any kind of dependent, like being dependable, at least I would think that they would appreciate knowing the schedule, because I would hate for anybody, just you raise this right before, the day before I pull the permit.
Yeah.
And you didn't want this just because you gave it something whatever, then that might be, so. That way they can monitor rates and things and say, hey, we better rush this. If it's not 95, then. Yeah, or the, I mean, who knows, but I just think we should be comfortable. Any other comments on the board discussion questions to provide any other direction? We gave differing direction on the timing. Does anybody else have any feedback on that? If we can go their direction, my quarterly doesn't have to do like, if we can get something on demand, but that's the motivation behind it.
I think quarterly is fine, if we can codify that, so that says January 1st, April 1st, that water dedication can be reassessed based on. Something that would give us some protection, and maybe know going in that this is only a 3-month window.
Right. But any other thought on that? I know you said ongoing.
I like, the 3 months makes a ton of sense, just in that regular, it's. I would still say something about like, if there was some extraneous thing that's out of the norm, not like project based, but if it was just another wild time. That maybe there's a little provision in there, be like, hey, it's jumped up like real fast, and it's been a month since we last did this, it's now worth it.
Yeah,
So, but I like the regularity unless it is what is it, some sort of extraneous circumstance, that would be my own do something.
like quarterly or at our discretion.
At our discretion could also be tied to if prices increase more than 8%.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, I just made that note, it was like, maybe it'd be something that like, over such X%.
But it also sounds like you said before that quarterly follow. Yeah, if that's the direction that the board wants to go to, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
That's just my point of
Is
view.
that everyone?
Great, nice. Right, so I have the direction.
Fantastic.
So I would like to thank Megan for her work
Oh,
on
yeah.
all things related to water. She has experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And sometimes all in the same day within the same hour. So it has been a tough project, but she has come in with the skills, the expertise, the connections that Wellington needed to get us to this point. And we're gonna keep moving forward. We've had some hiccups and things, but we acknowledge that, and it's a process, and it takes a long time to renegotiate an agreement that was made before probably most of you were ever even born.
I was born that year.
Were you born that late?
I always remember how.
It was 3 years too.
I know, and
I was in.
Carol and I were alive then. So
Was probably practicing law.
you were practicing law. Graduating high school, so
It was incredibly complex and heavy, and you were able to
Yes.
clearly explain that.
Yes.
Yeah, I also appreciate that backstory. Because
And feel free to reach out if you have ask questions about that, but some of the reason I did make it that dense was to ensure that there was sort of a piece of reference material for you.
Yeah.
That. in some way.
And I mean, I feel like having this as our first, work session is really important for the folks in the town that have been chomping at the bit, if you're on the Let's Talk and whatnot. I think people are like waiting to hear more, so I'm glad that we were able to give them some information if they're participating online or waiting for an answer for any of us. I think that's really important for us to decide. It's appreciated. That's what we all did as our first work session.
Let's make sure that we wait until it's a formal action before we, let's stop on. Guess what?
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
go on, let's talk Wellington, that'd be my thing too.
Yeah.
Let's say that, right?
What Sam also mentioned, he's mentioned norm of behavior and the, rules of engagement, this kind of things that match the other conversations that we've had.
Yeah.
Definitely want to discuss that going forward.
And if you all want more information about water, and have questions later, just let me know, and I've set up one-on-ones with most of you, and Aaron, I will give you access to my calendar, so that way you can take, in fact, I'll give you all access to my calendar. But that way you can look to see when we want to pop in at some point in time, but I can schedule time with Megan to join us during those one-on-one meetings, so you can. She's the expert. I will not try to answer those questions. So just let me know.
Before we leave, you have one becoming from Metro District feedback. You can choose, any questions or.
Who are we submitting it to? Oh,
So what
That would
we
be
need
me.
to do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate that, and I'm sending you an email here in a minute. We're gonna start our June 9th meeting at 5:30 p.m. with a work session, on the impact fee discussion. And we'll put that on your calendars, but I'm gonna send you an email first, and then including staff, and then Carl as well. Generally, we would have a work session after a regular meeting, but, we have an executive session that night, so we've had to kind of rearrange things because we want to make sure to get those impact fee information out to you, so you have proper time to discuss that.
And is that same conversation that was at the one of the last meetings of the
Yeah.
previous board?
Ordinance 04/2026, so, yeah, bringing that back so you all can talk about it and hopefully give us some direction. Okey dokey, thank you.
Thank you.